So, Kate Schutt, thank you so much for joining me on the Burning Castle podcast. It's really great to see you in this context because we've worked together, talked together about different things, hopefully things that we'll get into on this podcast today because they're important. But before we jump in, I just want to give people a sense of who you are, what you do, where you come from, and I'd rather that you do it instead of me.
Sure
So
thing.
please.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Ashley. It's a real honor. And every time we've spent any time together, I've really been impressed and what would be the other word I'd use? Just sort of felt like I met a kindred spirit.
Thank you. I did
Yeah.
too. 100%.
So who am I? Kate. My name is Kate Schutt. My last name's spelled Schutt, but I pronounce it like shut the door. Is an easy way to remember it. I do two things. The first thing is I'm a musician. I write and sing and perform music that sounds like lost jazz standards. That's how I describe it, AKA jazz pop, kind of. I also say that, the songs I write or I endeavor to write, because I don't always succeed, are the kinds of songs that Ella Fitzgerald or Billie Holiday would be singing if they were alive today.
Wow, that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. My songwriting hero is Cole Porter. So one of my songwriting heroes. So that's always, I'm sort of trying to always write a song that sounds like that, but of course filtered through my own perspective. So that's the first thing I do. And the second thing I do is I'm a life coach. More specifically, I'm a change coach. I help walk athletes, entrepreneurs, C-level executives, artists, seasoned and unseasoned, through major changes in their life. And change seems to be the through line. I have a very wide array of clients from all walks of life, all shapes and sizes, all ages, everything you can think of. And the through line seems to be people trying to make or wanting to make or craving to make, sort of massive change in their life.
Yeah, and it's something, just looking at your bio and, at what you're doing right now, it's like, change is something that seems to be a through line for you in your life. I mean, it's like, you look at, you've done so much and you do so much currently, and that ranges from the music to the coaching to the work that you do for the Ucross Foundation, which is so important, and all stretching all the way back to your university experience, where I believe you studied poetry, and you can inform us exactly what it was at Harvard. And at the same time, and correct me if I'm wrong again, you were a D1 athlete.
Correct. Yes.
Which is really wild. I mean, you don't
two
have
sports as well.
Two sports. Like there's not a lot of those out there. Two sport D1 athlete, division one athlete, which is really the creme de la creme of athletics, while studying poetry at Harvard, and then going on to effectively what is the Harvard of music, which is Berklee College of Music. So, and that's a lot, and it's a lot of strands, and it's a lot of threads. And I think that's something that challenges a lot of people today, especially because the old model was you do one thing, you do the 30-year thing, you get your pension, you retire. Today it's not that. Today it's you do 5 things, 10 things, 20 things, but that's really hard. So how has it worked for you, and how does it work for you?
That's a great question. And I think, as you mentioned, we're all at the speed of life now is meant, so quick, and we either change jobs or we change hats really quickly. Just to make sure the record is clear, I didn't do Berklee at the same time I was doing Harvard and athletics.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank goodness. So I was playing sports for Harvard and studying English literature, and with specific focus on poetry, and then really had sort of a epiphany and realized that at the time, this was 1993 to 95, were my first 2 years at Harvard, that I wasn't going to go on and be a coach That didn't, a sports coach, that didn't interest me at that time. There were no Olympic opportunities for women's ice hockey or women's lacrosse. So that wasn't in the cards for me. And I, certainly, even if that what had been, then, you know, there are no professional women's leagues. So my epiphany was one day when I was walking down to the rink to practice, it was like, how many hours a day do I practice my sport? You know, and it was, on any given day, it was 6 hours, wow. You know, and that's not including weekends when we traveled for our games, right. And we'd be gone all weekend. And I was like, wow, what would be possible if I put 2 hours towards my music? Mm-hmm. So that's immediately when I essentially dropped out of Harvard and went to Berklee College of Music for a couple of years, mm-hmm. and then came back to Harvard, finished my sports career, got my degree, went back to Berklee. I never graduated from Berklee, but took 9 semesters plus of classes, mm-hmm. there. Anyway, so I just want to say that. So back to your real question of how do you do all these things at once? Man, you know, I wish I had a great answer. I think as I've gotten better at it as I've gotten older, which is presence, not perfection.
Right.
You know, and I think the thing that becomes, it was easier back then. We didn't have, the internet was very new. Mm-hmm. I was still turning in papers, like, you know, typing papers up and turning them in, not emailing them in. And I use that example, that's sort of a strange example, but, you know, like when I was playing ice hockey, I was playing ice hockey.
Right.
When I was doing my homework, I was doing homework. There wasn't the level of distraction that there is right. today.
Yeah.
So, but of course I'm alive today. So now I deal with that. And, you know, for me, I think it's holding in mind this idea that you can actually only do one thing at a time, and, presence, not perfection. So whatever it is you're doing, be fully present. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, some is better than none. Mm-hmm. So when there's a lot of things going on, you know, and I think the more you do that, the more you sense like, oh, what I need right now is to dive in fully to this thing. Or there's a period where, you know, you're kind of doing 3 or 4 things at once. Mm-hmm. So I think trusting your gut and just knowing that if you're interested and interesting and curious, that there will always be more things than you'll ever be able to do in one lifetime, and making a kind of peace with that too. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know if that's a great answer, but
yeah, no, it's helpful. You know, it also makes me think of when you trust your gut, because a lot of the time we all have this head gut, you know,
yes,
dilemma, and
yes.
A lot of the time, I think that we hear the old messages. We hear them like echoes of like, well, you know, buckle down and do the one thing and stick to it. And, you know, which is true. And I do think there's an element of like, when you follow through and you stay with something for a long time, as you clearly have with your music, mm-hmm. there's a compound effect of skill, of mastery, of exploration, mm-hmm. And it deepens. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you know, it doesn't mean that we need to shut out the other things. And at some point, those other things can become like synergistic in a way. They add even where you wouldn't really think they would add. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you found to be the case with all the many things that you currently do?
Yeah, I think that there's, you know, at a certain point, it becomes your unique angle, you know, that right. if you're interested, I mean, for me, certainly there would be no way that I could write the songs the kind of music I write had I not studied English literature for right. so many years. Like, and that's so much, there's just no way. The kind of songs I'm interested in writing, and I'm you know, in trying to be the best or my best songwriter, you know, trying to write my best songs, require a level of critical analysis and as I'm writing, and a level of literariness, for lack of a better word, because that's the kind of song I'm trying to write, you know. And so I think to your point, like at some point that thing that seems so different now is really fundamental to my music. You know, my music wouldn't be my music without it.
Right.
So I think your point is really like that. Yes, of course, I have a performance psychologist that I've been studying with since the beginning of the year, and that's been an amazing journey. His name is Mark Aoagi. And the way he likes to talk about it is like, you know, you can't, as an elite performer in any category, not just sports, not just music, but in your own life, as the elite performer of your own life, there are times when you have to focus and do the work that gets you to that level of excellence. You know, and so the great performers across all genres will be, you know, a 9.7 in one thing. And then they might be like an 8.1 in something else, you know, and then there might be a lot of things that are like a 5 in, but they don't let the 5s worry them that much. They're not interested, you know, they know. And then maybe the 9.7, like they're trying to go from 9.7 to 9.8, you know, and maybe they're trying to bump up their 8 a little bit, but you know, there's always a point where you have to get that core competency, as you said, you know,
right.
And then it's like, and then the other things are like, what are you comfortable with? You know, are you comfortable with an 8? Do you want it to be an 8.5? You know, or are you trying to get everything up to a 9, you know?
So that would be like, as an example, let's say, you know, you find that for yourself or for any individual, songwriting might be their 9 or 9.5 or 9.7, but let's, you know, the instrument that they play may be slightly lower than the songwriting.
Right.
So they're leading with the one thing, and then maybe the, you know, stage presence or whatever else might be a 5. And whatever, I'm a great masterful songwriter. That's okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then kind of, I mean, you know, this is just but one framework to look at it and to decide like, well, what's going to be worth my time? You know, like, well, first of all, what's the price of admission to the game you're trying to play, right? Like, how good do you have to be to even get on the field, right? Because there's, in most types of jobs and things you want to do, there is a level that you have to, the minimum standard, right, that you have to meet. So okay, do you do that? And then it's like, well, where are these other skill sets, and what is worth your time? And it's sort of like a back of the envelope type of thing. You know, he made me go through this exercise because, as you pointed out, I'm interested in a lot of things, and so songwriting is one of them, but playing my instrument masterfully is also one of them. And I would say my songwriting is more at the level of a 9, or, you know, above a 9, and my instrument playing is more like an 8, or maybe like a 7.9. And it's like, well, what is the level of energy I need to take the instrument from, you know, the 8 to the 9 versus taking the songwriting from a 9 to a 9.2 or to a 9.3, you know? Right. So this is getting ridiculous to talk about, but yeah, I think the point is that, you know, it's sort of like making peace with things being somewhat in this like state of, you know, unevenness. Yeah. And it's, there's probably a way in your life, I bet, and in what you do, that you have to be comfortable with that. And so you are, as you're developing other skills. Because I can imagine, I know you're a writer, and I know that when you're writing a book, you have to be okay with like the shitty first draft, to use Annie Lamont's phrase, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, very much so.
And so you don't really worry about that until you get to the end of the shitty first draft, right?
Right. Well, I think that's the optimal approach.
Okay,
if
sure.
if you can find a way not to worry, yeah.
Yeah. So you're comfortable with the unease of things not being perfect as you're doing them. That's really, I think that's a key part of, you know, developing skill set.
Absolutely, because I think that the alternatives on either side of that, one side being just despair and it doesn't allow you
Yeah.
to go forward, and the other side
Suffering.
being,
Yeah.
yeah, just pain of every
Yeah.
moment, which is
Uh-huh.
horrible. But the
Yeah.
other side of it being kind of a diluted state where you're writing that first draft and you're like, wow,
I'm
I'm
amazing.
amazing.
Yeah.
This is, everyone's going to jump out the window when they read this or hear this,
Yes.
and that's
Yeah.
just, that's a even probably worse
Yeah.
than the painful state, because then you're just, you're never going to improve. So
Yeah, and it's art. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, maybe if you're making a widget, this conversation probably applies in a different way, but like a piece of writing, a song, a dance, a visual artwork, like, let's all remember it's art. And there is taste involved, and you don't have any control over that. I mean, my example that I always use, and one of my heroes, is Vincent van Gogh.
mm-hmm.
You read the letters of Vincent van Gogh, and you understand that, there was a person who was doing his art with zero acknowledgement from the world.
Right.
And in fact, we know now that the only reason that Van Gogh became Van Gogh is through his wife, his brother's wife,
mm-hmm.
who set about like making him known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the effects of which we're still feeling today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you have to remember and account for taste, and that you may be ahead of your time, you may be behind your time, you may be behind your time, but ahead of when everything comes back around in the circle. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and that cuts to the question of why you're doing it, and
right.
That's a question. I think there's never a single static answer that you can just be like, oh, this is why I wrote it down. Here's the answer. I think it's something that also requires a play with that tension to say, it's part of the audience, it's part of me, it's part of self-expression, it's part of wanting to have a positive impact on the world around me. It's things you don't even think about, things you don't even know. But I think it's almost that you sort of just have to continue to explore that question and suspend the judgment at any given moment to say, well, this is why I'm doing it. This is, unless it's commercial and you say, well, it's really clear. Right. My last book sold 50,000. This time I wanted to sell 75,000. That's why I'm doing it. And that's a different thing.
Right.
But,
I think you use the word tension, and that's a really great word.
Yes.
Like there's always this level of tension. If you're really going after something, and you have to be willing to accept it.
Right.
And I think how much sleep you've had, and how, all of those sort of taking, what my Zen teacher, Sherry Huber, calls like taking care of the human. When you take care of the human, we can accept a lot more tension, of this creative tension, this sort of, working a little bit on this thing and then going over here and, feeling like, oh my God, I got to catch up over here, and this isn't quite up to the level that I'm used to, like being able to sit and be with that tension and be okay with it. That's like a meta skill.
Yes, it absolutely is. And I do think that that's absolutely correct to think that you need to take care of the human, which I think in some ways means find a way to live life that is a good way, to the extent possible, like to enjoy the day, enjoy what you're doing, take a break, you're never going to be able to white knuckle success in the arts, maybe in other things, maybe not, but certainly not in anything artistic or even creative in general, because that's not what it's about. It's not about driving through doing 80 hours a week like you're working at Goldman Sachs. It's just, that's not the point, and I think that's the confusion, is that especially today, especially in the world of the internet, where we see quote unquote success, we see the person with 100 billion followers on whatever, and we're like, oh God, I'm gonna have to work so hard to get that. And you're like, wait a second, that's actually not the point. The point is something very, very different. And I think that's also, you and I have discussed in the past a different approach, a different model, a different worldview than whatever the Taylor Swift worldview to music might be. And that is one that is about playing with tension. And, it's something we've talked about, a mutual, let's say, mentor from afar of ours,
Yes.
who is Seth Godin.
Uh-huh.
And Godin talks a lot about, finding the smallest thing that you can do, the smallest way that you can succeed or have an impact. And it's like, when you think about that as the starting point, magic can really happen. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that, with your work and the way that you've started to approach it, including how you've thought about releasing an album into the world.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something you can talk a little bit more about, and what you're doing in that regard, because I think that's something that's very important to a lot of people.
Sure. Well, I just have to second or say here for what you said. That find the smallest amount of good you can do and do it, and stay present to it. I think is such a beautiful way that he puts that, and
right.
It's so. I think if we can stop our attention from being fractured all the time and remain in those moments of creation, but I'm in my practice room right now. When I am in here and I'm solely in here and I don't have the phone here and I don't have a deadline looming, or even if I do and I can just put it out of my head and I'm just in here to explore whatever it is I choose to explore that day. I drop into flow, and coming out of this room, I feel refreshed, and I think that's something that people can get from their work,
right,
if they approach it the right way.
Right.
So that was a little addendum to what you said, but yeah. How did I release the record? Well, so this year I finally released a record I had been thinking about for a very long time and writing songs towards for a very long time. And the backstory, just to give some people some context, is that in 2010, I was living in New York, actually just about to go do a kind of like a cruise ship gig, but not on a ship, in Doha, Qatar. Playing a couple sets a night, solo music. And I went home to say goodbye to my parents, and my mom told me that she hadn't been feeling well and she had just had a CAT scan, and that essentially while I was there, the results would come in, and they did indeed come in, and she was diagnosed, or she had a tumor the size of a grapefruit in her stomach, and the doctor needed to operate immediately, etc. So basically, I went from one day thinking I was saying goodbye to my parents, and about literally like 2 days later flying to Doha, Qatar, to actually going back to New York, breaking my contract, unpacking my bags, repacking them, moving down to Pennsylvania where my parents lived, and moving in with my parents into a childhood bedroom, and becoming my mom's primary caregiver for the next, at that point, who knew how long it was going to be. It turned out to be 5 years, roughly 4.5, and then like a half of a year kind of getting my dad sorted and back on track. So that's a long way of saying I didn't pick up my guitar for about 1.5 years, though I kept notes of the things I wanted to write, the songs I wanted to write. And eventually my mom went into her first remission, and I got a chance to go to the Ucross Foundation, which is an artist residency program in Wyoming. And I was luckily gifted 6 weeks of time there, and my mom was completely healthy and well during that time. Wow. It was like kismet. Amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. And I started to write these songs, and fast forward to she died. I wrote 7 or 8 songs that she heard before she died. She died, and then I began writing the rest of the songs, a lot of which I couldn't write because they were from her perspective, and I couldn't do it until she wasn't in her shoes anymore, so to speak. Right. And then I recorded the record. It's called Bright Nowhere, after a phrase from the Seamus Heaney poem, a beautiful Seamus Heaney poem. And I released it basically in 2 parts, because why not? Because I can. First of all, I'm not affiliated with a label and I can do what I want. And secondly, because the material, it's not a downer, definitely not a downer, the record, but it is a very sharp, diamond hard look at mortality. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot. It wasn't a lot for me, but I lived it. So
Right.
I released it in like in a half, basically. I released one half of it, 6 songs, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, released the other half of it. And with all of that came my songwriting notes for the record, came behind the scene video from filming it, came the Seamus Heaney poem, came all these other sources that I used to write these songs. Because, as I said, I'm a very literary writer, so I have a lot of sources.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and that was really amazing, because I think it was, for a lot of people, a more digestible way to engage with the music.
Yeah. It's also more, it's a way to engage that's engaging. It's more of a participation. When you're not just looking on Spotify, and flipping through, you're really entering to the world of the album, and in this case, your world, because it's so personal. It's so much a part of who you are, and it is a beautiful album. I've had the privilege of listening. It's amazing, and I really recommend everybody to go listen to it.
Thank you.
It's that good. But I think the key point there is that where you do something that is so personal, you give other people a chance to engage in a personal manner, and that is that, the smallest possible good approach to it, because you're not looking for the million streams on Spotify.
Yeah.
That's not the point of it. The point of it was that engagement, is that experience of it. But to return to the experience that sort of gestated the album, which was being your mother's primary caregiver. What jumps out at me there is 5 years. I mean, 5 years is a long time. What sustained you? I mean, I know what it's like as a writer, and I'm sure anyone else out there who has a passion for something knows what it's like to be torn away from that, or kept away from that thing for even a few days, or in my case, when my children are born, like, you have to kind of stop and, like, do other things for a long time, and it's hard. But 5 years is a different story.
Yeah.
How did you continue to get through that?
I mean, there's so many ways I can answer that question. One is, I didn't know it would be 5 years. So, we were just living day to day. Right. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, essentially stage 4. We knew that it would kill her one way or the other. It was a very rare and aggressive form, so it was going to kill her sooner rather than later. I was very clear with her from the day one that we weren't going to mince words about this, and we were going to talk very directly about her impending death and live, the best quality life we could live, knowing that was around the corner. And that my whole job was to maximize her quality of life. And how did I do it? Just day by day. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it was easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done some pretty hard things in my life. But that being said, I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was it was the most profound experience of my life. And it was day by day. It was very dark. If my girlfriend was here, she would tell you that it was hard on me. I was living in a childhood bedroom. My days were filled with the bare necessities. It's very it's exactly like caring for a newborn. Right. I haven't cared for a newborn, but I was doing the same things, like making food, going to the doctor, going to the chemo suite, spending 7 hours in the chemo suite, then having to spend 4 more in the blood transfusion room, grocery shopping, you name it. I mean, and obviously towards the end, it became much more about her bodily care. We went into hospice very, very early, which was an amazing experience. Yeah, it was just one day at a time. And luckily I have surrounded myself with great mentors and people who could help me be the family. Really, that was what my life coach, John Morgan, said to me at one point when I was pushing back against it all and, despairing over the fact that I was watching my friends like rocket to stardom, get record deals and get those 20 billion followers on Instagram. And there I am literally like, changing my mom's diapers, like I had really, he said that to me and that really helped. Like, you be the family. That's who you are. That's what you're doing. And yeah.
Something you said there jumped out at me, which is that you would do it again in a heartbeat. And it reminds me of this, I think it's quite a well-known story of, I think his name was Admiral Stockton.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, so
he was, I know the story. Yeah, he was flying a Navy, he was a Navy pilot, wasn't he? And he shot down over Vietnam, and as he was parachuting in, he basically realized that he was like stepping back in time.
Yeah, and he was taken as a prisoner of war, and held for a number of years.
Yeah.
And when he came out, that's what he said, is that he knew while he was still captive that was the event that would define his life. And he knew that once it was over, whenever that would be, that he would never want it to be otherwise. That it was him. And
that's exactly what this experience was for me. Exactly.
Right. And I think that's that is connected to what you said earlier about the music or whatever you do being this product of the uniqueness of whoever you are and where you've come from. There is no way for you to control it and to say, well, I want to be this kind. I want to be the author that gets the book deal out of college and just rockets to fame and has a great time and whatever.
Yeah,
that's like
right.
It's not in our control. It's not in our hands. But what is in our hands is the ability to embrace the story and to say, oh, actually, this is my story. Just the way that you talked about the 9.2 and the 8 and the 5 being like, this is the kind of artist that I am, and I'm going to fully accept that. But that's the hard part. That's the really hard thing that nobody really talks about. And I think maybe, certain experiences like the one you had with your mother, perhaps, I don't know, but maybe help you learn how to do that very hard thing of embracing fate, living with a love of fate.
Yeah, I think it was not a choice. Right. Because when I tell the story, I say like, well, my mom got her the news, and then I decided to move home, and I say the word decided, but like that is the wrong word.
Right.
There was we got the news, and I turned to my dad and I said, take me back to New York. I have to wrap my affairs up. I'll be down tomorrow. And it wasn't a choice. It was, I guess, fate, because there was no way I was making any other decision. Right. Like, it just was not happening. That was the decision I made, and I made it to the very end, like it was a decision that I knew there was no bailing out. Right. As dark as it got, there was no bailing out. And frankly, I didn't even know if I would be like, I didn't even know. I was open enough to be like, I don't know if I'll be a musician on the other side of this. It's such a long time to be gone from the scene, literally gone, like, so it was, I still have to sometimes say to myself, oh yeah, remember you weren't doing music for 5 years. So if you get a little frustrated about where things are and what things look like in your life, don't forget, because it's easy to forget that I did all that at this point. I'm so far beyond it, obviously it informs everything I do. And I've been contacted by a lot of people who's now are like, so you're the expert on death. you know, because I have this comfortability. I'm very comfortable with this, landscape of illness and moving into it and out of it as a person who happens to live on the planet of of well-being currently.
Yeah.
And I'm very able to, and that's, I guess, what you were talking about. I mean, in the defining thing became for me this ability to be okay with loss and grief and stay in that place and not have it
Right.
rattle me.
Yeah. Which, it's obviously it's so crucial in life to be able to accept death, not just because it's a part of life, obviously it is,
Right.
but also because, it's so much a part of love, the presentiment of death, the feeling
Mic drop.
that, you know that it's all going to end, the people in your life are not going to all be there, and that actualizes love, the presentiment of death. And you cannot really fully love anything without understanding or feeling that presentiment of death as well. So I feel like that love and death are as seemingly unconnected as they are, as opposite. It's in fact that very much the case that they're just intertwined in our lives. But
you nailed it. You said it beautifully.
Thank you. So, and returning to life, where you went to the Ucross artist
Foundation.
residency, foundation, you had those 6 weeks. I think people hear those words, artist residency and whatever, and they don't really know what that means. But Ucross in itself and that place is very special, physically special. So maybe just give a little sense of what it is and what that was like.
Sure. The Ucross Foundation is an artist residency program. So basically what that means is an artist residency is a time and a space given to an artist to work on a project or multiple projects, to just do their work. That's basically what an artist residency is. And there's hundreds, if not thousands of them in the United States and, all over the world. And they are on things like a ship in the Arctic, or a cabin in a national park, or a bunk on a train. I knew an artist who did one for Amtrak. We did an artist residency on the Amtrak cross-country train. Amazing. So what makes Ucross unique is that it's a 20,000 acre cattle ranch in the high plains of Wyoming. So this is the northern edge of the state of Wyoming. So when you say high plains, you really mean it. There's like not a tree in sight, kind of in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains. It's utterly stunning landscape. I mean, there's just no place like it in the United States. It's vast. It's barren, but of course not barren also when you're really in it and among it. It's tempestuous. It's filled with mysteries. And so Ucross gives 9 artists time and space to work on their art. And the rule is, you can't be disturbed unless the building's burning down, and your lunch is delivered to your door. And at nighttime, there's an incredible chef who's on staff at Ucross, who makes an incredible meal, prepares it for you all, lays it all out, cleans up her dishes, leaves, and you and the 8 other people have to get this gorgeous dinner to enjoy, every weeknight together. And so it's a real, it really is just time and space to dive into something that you're working on. And often there's a lot of writers where there can only be 2 musicians at a time because we make noise and we have to have separate studios. But there's a lot of writers, a lot of painters, a lot of mixed media artists, dancers, choreographers, musicians, composers. So it's just a really magical place. I just don't even know what to say about it. It completely changed my life.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds, I think it can sound to people something that's like almost like a resort, but
yes,
I think what people what people miss is that for artists, for creators of any kind, those two things, time and space,
Mhm.
are you fight tooth and nail. You fight so hard for the scraps all of your life, all of your working life as a whatever artist you are.
Mhm.
And to have someone just gift it to you for 6 weeks, it's not, it's something that is almost permanent. It's almost indelible, as you know, because it's so rare.
100%. Yeah.
So
And, it's not always, I mean, first of all, I have to say, again, you put it perfectly, like life as an artist or as a creative being, let's not even use that term, because some people will be like, I'm not an artist, but like
yeah,
a life trying to create something in the world, all you're doing is fighting tooth and nail for time and space to work on that project.
right.
And as you said, and Ucross gifts it, with no strings attached. Of course, you have to apply to get in, and you have to say something on your application about what you want to do. But there's no one saying at the end, did you write
Right.
2.5 chapters of your novel? No one does that. It's basically like, once you're there, you're there. You're there to do your work. You're there to experience the place. You're there to experience what's possible with this amount of freedom. I can remember talking to some residents, and the residencies happen in 2, 4, 6 week chunks. So, you don't have to have only 6 weeks to go. Some people go for as little as 2 weeks. But I can remember talking to some of the moms, like the artists that were moms, saying just the thought of me not having to deal with cooking for 2 weeks was like a revelation, a revelation and a revolution in my creative life, like, not only did I not have to prepare it, but I didn't even have to think about it.
Yeah.
The mental space that opened up for them.
Yeah.
To write.
Right. Yeah. The mental space. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you got back there and you're working again on music,
Mm-hmm.
I think the question that I'm interested in is about the kind of music that you create, which you'd characterized it as the lost jazz standards.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about the jazz part, because jazz is connected to, I mean, obviously it's still very much alive, but it's also rooted in something that's earlier. What is it about jazz? What got you to jazz? And what keeps you in that tradition?
That's a great question. Well, I grew up, I'm the youngest of 3. I have 2 older brothers, so I was mostly, I never got to choose the music I listened to as a kid because of my 2 older brothers. So I listened to a lot of classic rock, and that's deeply embedded in who I am and how I play and what I play. And my first bands were cover bands playing that kind of music: Jimi Hendrix, the Rolling Stones, Janis Joplin, the Grateful Dead, the Doors, all that music. But at the same time, my parents were playing Ella Fitzgerald. That was one of their favorite singers. So I heard and could sing all the words of the Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter Songbook, before I even knew that I could. Basically, it was so embedded in me. And so that had always been there. And then I studied with a guitar. My first and sort of only guitar teacher before I went to Berklee was a major jazzer. He was like, came straight out of the bebop tradition. And so I was hearing it and playing it in my lessons. Even though at the same time I was, really into whatever the music of the 90s and the 2000s, the current music. So I guess it was always in there. And then when I got to Berklee, I mean, it's a contemporary music school, so you can do anything at Berklee. I mean, you could be doing bluegrass or newgrass there. You could be doing R&B, but I don't know. To me, my biggest heroes are those singers, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, those players. They have a complete freedom on their instrument. That's what I want. I'm interested in freedom for myself and others. And if I can play my instrument like that, or have the freedom to create like that, that's kind of what I'm after. And so that's why I really dove sort of headlong into studying jazz, and because it also gave me the skill set at a sort of higher order.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a demanding art form.
Yeah, it's something, it always fascinated me. I played a little bit of piano growing up, and I played classical, and it's kind of, classical is like, here's the song, learn it. And there's a little bit of room to be creative with it. But when it came to learning jazz, I was like, wait a second, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do here. Like, what notes am I supposed to play? I don't get it. Like, and when you think about it that way, it's this open field that you have to, you take the core elements and you have to make something out of it, which I really couldn't comprehend it on that level. But in that sense, it's something lyrical. Like you're kind of
very.
like, you're adding to this thing that's constantly, it's like a artistic blockchain. Like, it's just
yes, it is. That's a great,
the tradition.
Yeah, that's a great way to talk about it. And I don't know, we should do, I don't know if anybody said that yet about jazz, or I haven't heard it, but it's basically an artistic blockchain. I mean, one could argue that all of music is too.
Sure. Yeah.
But for sure, it's the learning of the tradition, and the language. It's a language in itself, and then learning how to speak the language, and then hopefully adding something of your own to the language if you're lucky.
Right. Yeah. And that's the incredible way that it evolves and changes in a way that, classical, you can still play and write classical music, of course, today. But it doesn't have that immediacy, in my opinion, that jazz can have. When you hear it in contemporary music, it still feels alive. And I guess that's why.
And I think the edges of classical music, contemporary classical music, they're doing this kind of work. It's just it's a different way of getting at the same thing. I think it's a different way of getting at the same freedom, basically. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a lot of that word, freedom. I mean, for me, that's so important. I've also started to think how important freedom is alongside independence.
Tell me more.
Well, I think that's, when you're talking about the freedom and within the creative act or creative moment, you are free to create. But to be independent means, and in this case, with you as an example, to not be enchained to a record label who's telling you, this is the kind of record we need from you, this is the kind of song, this is, we need the single. You're no longer independent, you're dependent. It might work for you as it does for a lot of people, but I think freedom and independence they have to exist together, because without the other one, the one can't exist properly. And that's what I've sort of been learning about with today's media, is that our media is very free from government interference. The government's not, cracking skulls, thank God. But the question then is, are they independent? Is our media independent of influence? And I think that applies across the board to any element of life. If you're seeking freedom, you must also be seeking independence, and vice versa. And I think that's such an important thing to learn. And I think it's something that your story really illustrates, because you maintained that independence. Even something like the experience with your mother, it was an act of independence. You were sort of, you put yourself in this context, but you did it and maintained independence by doing it in order to do it.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it was a free fall. It was like, at times, certainly in the beginning, it was just like, I don't know where I'm going to end up. And I might not even end up as myself on the other side of this. Right. And that was, I could, again, if my girlfriend was listening to this conversation, she'd chime in now and say, yeah, one of the things you consistently said to me throughout that experience was, I do not recognize myself.
Wow. Well, that's an interesting place to be, a difficult place to be. But I think that's also, again, to not be dependent on identity. There's a great thing I just read, Naval Ravikant, who's
I know who he is.
Great entrepreneur. For anyone who doesn't know, go seek him out. Just type in the letters NAVAL.
Yes.
And one thing he talks about is that how decreasing his emphasis on identity makes him happier. because then you're not married to these concepts. You're not married to I'm this and must do this and must achieve this, and you are just the thing that you happen to be in this moment that you're in, you know, touching back to what you'd said earlier in the conversation.
Yeah, and I think being a creative person, it's hopefully, as if you're a wise creative person, I think you can get to that state, because I often like to talk about, you know, I coach people around songwriting or albums, releasing albums and things like that, and they're always so, you know, wrought up about how to release it, and, you know, this is the be all and end all, and this is it, and I'm like, it's not. It's just a snapshot of it's literally a Polaroid of you in this moment.
Right.
That's all it is.
Right.
You know, and anybody who wants to say otherwise, like, doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, because it's just you when you decided to push send. Right. You know, or release, or when you decided to, you know, have your book available, like right. Whenever that exact moment you pushed send on it and it appeared, that's when the snapshot was taken.
Right. Yeah. That's just opening the book and starting that story. And that's, again, that's something Seth Godin talks about, that we put so much emphasis on the launch, where the launch really means nothing, because you've got no idea what's going to happen next. You've got no idea what's going to happen in a year, or 5 or 10 or 100 years, to the, you know, the Van Gogh point.
To the Van Gogh point. Yeah, exactly. You have no idea.
Right.
You have no idea.
And that's about maintaining that kind of faith in what you're doing. So where can people find more about you? Where can they listen to the music? Where do they engage?
Sure. Well, everything is on the socials. It's at Kate Schutt, so KateSchutt. My website is www.kateschutt.com. If you're interested in coaching, I kind of separate those two, but there's a lot of crossover. You can find my coaching website at incandescentcoaching.com. I'm not going to spell that out, but it's the word incandescent with the word coaching.com. And I think the music can be heard now, after we launched it, sort of for everybody to take part in it. We waited a little while, and now it's available on Spotify and all those things. Though you can still go and get the experience if you'd like it. In fact, I just had a couple sales yesterday, which it'd been a minute since someone had gone for the experience, and I was like, oh, that's really cool.
And where can they get the experience?
Artistshare.com. That's the label that I partnered with to release it that way. So it's just artistshare.com. And if you look around on that site, you'll find me. It may be artistshare.com/Kate Schutt, but it's been a minute, so I can't remember, but I'm there. In fact, the record is, nominations for the Grammy ballots are just about to happen. And so the record label has put it up for a number of nominations, we hope.
Amazing.
So if any of your listeners are voting members of the Recording Academy, I'd love for you to vote for Bright Nowhere. But anyway, it's just a great vote of confidence from my label and, you know, from my partner in releasing this record.
Yeah, and I really recommend people do check it out on ArtistShare, because it is a different thing. It's just different than what we're accustomed to. And it's not just about listening to a track or two. It's much more than that. It's much more like seeing an exhibit in a great gallery or museum, where you really have an experience. So that's a great way to put it.
So
Kate, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I hope we do it again.
Let's do it again. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you for just your insightful questions and there's a number of phrases that you used that I will squirrel away for myself and my own use.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great.
So Kate Schutt, everybody, as Kate mentioned, check her out, kateschutt.com and artistshare.com. And we'll be looking forward to hearing more.
Yeah, thanks so much. Bye-bye.